widely watched congressional race that was very close, very expensive, and very strange at the end. It was a drama rivaling anything on stage. The San Diego Opera died and then was resurrected. More drama in local transportation. Cabbies battle for a living wage while ride-sharing services flourish, sometimes by skirting the rules. And the housing market's price recovery from the Great Recession has stalled. I'm Mark Sauer. We look at some of San Diego's top stories in 2014. Our year-end edition of the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to this special year-end edition of the Roundtable. And joining me for today's discussion of some of the top stories of 2014 are iNewsSource editor Lori Hearn. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Mark.
And we've got three KPBS news editors. Laura Wingard, good to have you here, Laura.
Hi, Mark.
Joe Guerin is here with us. Good to see you, Joe.
Hello, Mark.
And Tom Fudge. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Mark.
Well, we knew it would be wildly expensive and very nasty, but the tight race between incumbent Scott Peters and challenger Carl DeMaio for San Diego's 52nd congressional district got nasty in ways unanticipated as Election Day neared. So, Laura, why did this race get so much attention in the first place?
Well, 2 years ago, it was a hard-fought race between Scott Peters and the then-incumbent Brian Bilbray, who's a Republican. And I think it was close then, and you had this situation where, Peters won, the Republicans wanted that seat back, and the Democrats wanted to make sure they kept it.
One of the very few across the country it was even competitive this year, and of course it was a big year for Republicans. Now, how much was spent on this race? It was a lot of money from the outside.
Yeah, $10 million poured into this race. There was a lot of, money spent on ads, some of it, by the candidates, but some of it by these outside sources. And that's what really shaped the race for much of the campaign. And they had, all these campaign ads that people got bombarded with, telling, painting these pictures of Scott Peters. I think we all know now he has a BMW.
He has a BMW.
And
got an allowance for that when he was on the city council.
And I mean, I think that DeMaio was trying to paint him as this spendthrift who brought, financial shame to the city when he was on the city council. And that was, sort of how the money was being spent that way. On the other hand, you had Peters trying to paint Carl DeMaio as this radical Tea Partier as opposed to just being a fiscal conservative who wants to bring across pension reform, which is how Carl wants to paint himself.
So it was going to be negative. It got negative. A lot of money to have those ads and the negative ads as we went along. And then something kind of weird happened toward the end. We went from this typical, blow by blow, standing there toe to toe with negative advertising to this whole thing shifting to DeMaio. He got in the spotlight on this whole sexual harassment issue that came up.
Right. The last month of the campaign really changed. And it started with Todd Bosnich, a former staffer for DeMaio, who gave an interview to CNN and talked about having been sexually harassed when he was on the staff. And DeMaio spoke to them and talked to the other media about it. He said, this is a fired campaign staffer. He's, we think he's behind the break-in that happened earlier this year at our campaign. He's just, he's a bad guy.
Tom?
I think this was a very interesting competitive race because this is a district, the 52nd, that is sort of coastal and inland. The Republicans have a slight edge when it comes to the number of registered voters, and so it was definitely a district that a Republican could have won.
Really in play for the GOP.
It was definitely in play for the GOP, but here you had a candidate, Carl DeMaio, who had already lost the race for San Diego mayor when he was up against Bob Filner. And he is not a real warm and fuzzy character. Now, he tried to present himself as a new Republican, being gay and all that, but he actually, I think, was part of a sector of the Republican Party that's been around for a long time, the libertarian end, which is very much against government spending money. And they have always been sort of in conflict with the conservative evangelical end. And so he was appealing to one group but not necessarily
so there was
the other.
that tension there. Well, Lori, as Tom notes, iNewsSource did some reporting on this and all. Very close race, very closely divided district. This sexual harassment issue in the end, was that the tipping point, or will we know?
Well, one thing I wanted to add when Tom was talking about how the district is divided, this district is also, it's slightly more Republican, but it's pretty much divided Republican, Independent, or declined to state, and Democrat.
Yeah, Independent's a big chunk of it,
very
too.
much, you know, up in the air, and those independent voters were, I think, the ones that nobody was quite sure about, even though you couldn't guarantee that the Republicans were necessarily going to be aligned with Carl. But it's really difficult to say because mail-in voting started so early. The allegations were barely in the news when mail-in ballots were started to be turned in. One of the things that could have made a big difference was the second allegation of sexual harassment that KPBS aired, and iNewsSource aired the weekend before the election. And that may have had some impact, some influence on people who were on the fence and who had not yet voted. It's really tough to say.
Really tough to say. Laura, I want to come back in the few seconds we have left in this segment. What about Mr. DeMaio? What happens to him now? Two-time loser. He lost for mayor, as Tom noted, and of course this
Right.
race.
Well, as iNewsSource had a story, it was on KPBS and their website. He's formed a super PAC, which will be able to raise money and be out
unlimited
there.
amounts of money.
Unlimited amounts of money. He could use that money. You know, he could become a candidate and run again. I think he faces a real hard challenge, even if you didn't have the sexual harassment allegations. I was looking at the numbers. I kind of compare him to Donna Fry. Donna Fry couldn't get past 46%, and she was a beloved candidate by some people, but she's a polarizing figure. He too is a polarizing figure, different polarizing, but he got 48% for Congress. That's all he was able to muster, and 47% for mayor. He may be in that Donna Fry category. They just can't get over the hump.
And maybe the GOP doesn't back him again here with that and all the clouds.
Well, and I would also say if he can't win that district during a midterm election
in a Republican year,
in a Republican year, he's certainly not going to.
Tough.
He's certainly not going to win when the president is running and so many more people come out to vote.
All right, we're going to shift gears now. The Fat Lady had sung, the sets were struck, and the San Diego Opera was shutting down after a half century as a cultural institution here. But wait, not so fast. The show went on after all, at least for this, the 50th season. But now what? Well, Lori, tell us about the dire picture that was painted by the leaders of the opera at the time. And, oh, boy, it's happened so fast. About a year ago or a little less than a year ago, it was looking grim.
It was all March 19th was the big day. I should preface this by saying this was certainly, the San Diego Opera was certainly the biggest art story of the year, and it actually made national headlines. Huffington Post, Opera News did a big takeout because opera companies have been having trouble across the country. Many have closed, many are trying to reinvent themselves, and the San Diego Opera was always known as being really financially stable. Ian Campbell, the former general director, took pride in telling people that the books were always balanced. So I think the biggest issue here was the surprise of it all. March 19th, an emergency meeting of the board of directors of the opera, and on the agenda, which wasn't even really shared with the members of the board when they were told they needed to attend this meeting, was to close down shop, that they simply didn't have enough money to go forward. What they wanted to do was say that we're not so deeply into the hole that we would have to file bankruptcy. And what Ian Campbell said is we want to close with dignity. But anyway, that's kind of what happened on the 19th. And after that, there were two different. The vote was 33-1, as I recall, to
so we're going to do this thing,
and we're going to do it. Yeah. And after that, there were two attempts to postpone the actual closing, and of course, as we know, it has now been revived.
Joe, on the business side of all of this, I don't go to opera. Maybe you don't go to opera. I can probably count on one hand, and all the years in San Diego I've been to an opera here. Tommy doesn't count. You know, there was a big hue and cry, but people weren't buying tickets. Are they buying tickets now? I mean, can you make a go of it, even in a big city?
Well, I think this is going to be an exciting time for the opera. That they are now going to have a chance to go out and try to reach the masses. In the past, under the previous administration, everything was kind of a staid type of traditional opera. They weren't trying these new ideas of going to maybe having some sort of opera type of event down at the Embarcadero or something like that.
Different
Going to
venue,
schools, yeah,
change it
different
up, yeah.
venues and that. And so this is going to be an opportunity for them to do that.
Some excitement and appeal. Tom?
Yeah, I think if this story were an opera, it would probably be Tosca, and Ian Campbell would be the evil police chief Scarpia, who has Cavaradossi in prison and tortures him. I'm kidding. He's actually not that bad a guy. But he really was the vision for the opera, and his vision was to do grand opera with singing stars, enormous sets, all of which was very expensive. And I think when he was looking down the road, he was looking at that. Maybe not exclusively, but primarily. And when he said, oh, we can't afford to keep going on, that's what he was talking about.
Keep going on this way.
Keep going on in this way. But there were other people who were saying, no, we can do, you know, a smaller product, a less expensive product. But he just didn't seem open to that.
Well, let's get back to our drama for a moment. What happened when they announced Mr. Campbell laid it all out and we're going to
Well, there was much hue and cry.
Right.
People don't think the average person or others care about the opera. There was a huge uprising. There were protests. I mean, hundreds of people would have been out of work. As a result, there were many meetings, and many members of the old board walked out, some in making a big issue of it. And there were other members who came to the rescue, if you will. Carol Lazier is now the board chair. She donated $1 million of her own money to see this 50th year through. And they are trying some different things. They're going to have 3 traditional operas, and then they're going to be trying some recitals and some other kinds of things. They've lowered ticket prices. They've done a number of things that they're hoping will. They've lowered their budget. They've cut their costs. They're going to be doing some of their performances at Symphony Hall instead of the Civic Theater, which is very expensive. They've gotten some in-kind contributions and that sort of thing to try to keep the costs down. So this year appears to be taken care of. 2016, 2017, we'll see.
Well,
they're doing a lot of strategic planning. So
it does look like the opera, after all this hue and cry and all this drama, has landed on its feet. They recently had an audit that showed that it was a going concern. I think they had a small operating deficit, but pretty insignificant given their entire budget.
Well, that's a good segue into the last. We've got a few seconds left with this segment. Investigation. Attorney General's looking into Attorney General.
The Attorney General actually stepped in May and opened an investigation. They haven't said confirmed or denied, but they've asked the opera for all kinds of financial documents going back to 1983. The opera is supported in part by taxpayers' money. The City of San Diego, the County of San Diego, and Chula Vista have all given an interest, right. And so there are a lot of questions about whether they made full disclosure when applying for grants for government money. So we will see. The investigation is ongoing. There's been no final report, as far as we know. We've recently checked it.
All right. Well, I know we'll be looking at that as we go forward. All right. The long struggle for San Diego cabbies to end exploitative practices finally bore fruit in 2014, but a new threat is bearing down on the taxicab business here: the sudden popularity of ride-sharing services like Uber and Lyft. Well, Tom, the taxi industry, it finally turned around. They came to a loggerhead here on this whole medallions issues. What were the cabbies complaining about?
Well, I think what they were complaining about is the fact that getting a taxi medallion, which is the permit you need to operate a taxi, has been thrown into this outrageous black market, or had been, where these permits were sold on the black market. Sometimes they would get more than $100,000 for one of these, and either you had to have a permit or you had to lease a cab from somebody who did have a medallion. And there were cabbies who were working 7 days a week, many hours every day, and probably earning something in the neighborhood of $5 an hour. So what the San Diego City Council did to respond to this finally this past year is they voted to remove the cap from the number of medallions, so that now supposedly you can have an unlimited number of medallions, and of course that is going to make it much less expensive to operate a cab in San Diego.
So big victory on that side, but then bearing down is this whole new phenomenon of ride sharing.
Yeah, as a matter of fact,
you've got the app there.
Yeah, I've got the cell phone here, and so let's see if I can call an Uber cab. Yeah. See, Uber, the thing
Don't leave us before the show's over.
Uber is a very interesting thing, and it's happening all over the world. They're active all around the world. They're in lots of places. People have no idea what to do with them. It's an essentially unregulated ride-sharing system where anybody who owns a car basically can be an Uber driver. You can take people places, charge them a certain amount of money. The company takes 20% of that. In return for that, Uber provides to you the app and some liability insurance. And so you pay them 20% and the rest is yours. And they've been just going like a wildfire and giving the traditional cab companies a tremendous amount of competition.
Now, Joe and Lori, we were talking a little bit before we came on the air here. The business of Uber versus the traditional taxi cab, is it maybe a generational thing? Younger folks are going to Uber who maybe never paid for a cab before, and cabbies are taking a hit, or they're staying with the old established...
Well, it's clearly a disruption in the industry, as we were saying. So many industries have experienced disruptions and have had to change and bob and weave to try to figure out what is going to be the next answer for their revenue streams. Uber is incredibly convenient. It's got an app. You don't have to have any cash with you. You just give them your credit card and they charge it. I know there's a lot of tension on the street. I've taken Uber myself, and I had a driver tell me he went to pick up a fare once, and a cab driver literally followed him all the way to the cab and leered at him as he picked this person up. So I think you can see that tension in the industry going on the street.
And another industry that's paying close attention to this is the automobile builders, the auto industry itself. The young people today, they have very little motivation to buy a new car or buy a car of any. If you're living in a big city, you don't need a car. And so the auto industry is paying very close attention to this to see what
get around. Well, maybe that's good news for Sandag and the environmentalists and folks who are trying to keep people out of cars and cut down the air pollution.
But I don't think
Laura?
it's just young people. That's the other thing, is that I know a lot of folks who are middle-aged who, living in San Diego, they're going to go to a restaurant in the gas lamp. They no longer have to look for parking or anything like that. They just call, Uber, picks them up, takes them to the restaurant down there. They get out. It's much easier.
Yeah, Uber, I mean, the business model has been incredibly successful. And
as you said, not just here, but in lots of places.
In lots of places. But there is an argument against Uber. For instance, in Germany, they won't allow Uber to operate because it's so unregulated. And some of the local cab companies are saying, hey, it's not an even playing field because we are regulated, we are required to do all these things, whereas Uber just kind of does whatever they want. And so I think that question of how and whether ride-sharing programs like Uber are going to be regulated and by whom is a question that's still out there.
So what about regulations here? Is there any talk locally? Is city council, or I don't know what agency would even look at it here?
Well, I think the questions you're asking are the same questions that everybody is asking. Like I think I said before, Uber, a lot of people look at Uber and it's so new and it's so different, they're really not sure what to do with it. But I tell you, it's appealing to customers, and I think it really is starting to make people think differently about whether they even need to own a car in a city like San Diego.
I think one of the things that I've thought about it and Lyft and these other options is that it gives so many more transportation options. I mean, even for older people who don't feel they want to drive. I think as more and more of these options are available, we don't have much public transit here, but if there are more options, I think people might feel more confident that, I still have a way to get around, have my independence. I see that trend as actually being a rather positive thing.
A couple seconds left. Go ahead.
The insurance industry often dictates what's permissible and what's not permissible, and so far they are providing the insurance for these drivers and for this industry, and allowing it to survive.
So it is going forward. All right, we're going to get to our final segment now. If you chart back to 2008, you're going to find a real volatility in the housing market here. The prices crashed down with the Great Recession. They surged back up. But now they've kind of hit a flat plateau, and it's not really rising the way it was. Joe, tell us what's happening in 2014 in the residential housing market.
Okay, well, let me take you back real quick to 2006, 2007. The market was enjoying the irrational exuberance, and that prices were over $500,000 for a median priced house in San Diego. 2008, it started to slip, and in 2009, it crashed, and the house's median price was down to about $300,000, so a significant drop. Since 2009, the market's kind of bounced along the bottom, and last year, 2013, escalated, started coming back, so like a house of fire, the pun.
A big surge, yeah.
And so now the prices are back up to almost $450,000 in a median house, a median-priced house.
Way back to where they were
just about
6 years ago.
Just about to where they were. And the market is actually, I think, stabilized. I think that's the word I would use to describe it. It's now at 4 to 5% increase in price of homes, none of this 20 to 24%, and that's a much more sustainable number. If you have a house that's worth $450,000 and it's going up 4 or 5% in a year, that's $15,000 or so about a year, and that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but over 10 years, that's $150,000, and that's a pretty good return on investment.
Mm-hmm. So, and turn that around, you've got a lot of young people, a lot of pent-up demand that kind of kinked toes when prices were crashing and everybody was losing jobs and they were worried about it, and then it did result in that surge. So some folks had a pretty good window there to get some San Diego real estate that was cheaper than we'd seen in years.
Yeah, they sure did. And the prices today, while they're staying this stable, they moving fast. The inventory of the houses stay on the market for less than 45 days right now, and that's quite quick to sell a house. It used to be before 2008. It was the average would have been 90 days or longer to put a house on the market and sell it. But now the low inventory, the high demand, they move quick. It just doesn't push the price up as fast.
And all those folks who were underwater way back then, a lot of them got well too, or were able to finally move a house.
Yeah, they're able to sell the house. The foreclosure crisis seems to be over.
Right, Laura?
Does the interest rates, they still are historically low.
How is that Fed just this week said, oh, boy, we're going to keep them low. Yeah.
Yeah. How does that affect?
Yeah, that's a huge plus because your interest rate, you can get an interest rate now on a 30-year loan for under 4%. I mean, it's, when I bought my first house way back, it was 12, 13% to buy my house.
I was in the same boat. We were delighted to get under 12% at one point near closing. It was crazy back then. Yeah, and we haven't seen that. We've seen these low rates for forever around here, so that keeps it affordable, at least on the financing end. Tom?
Well, and the other thing is foreclosures. There was a time, I think like 2009, where so many house sales were based on foreclosures, foreclosed houses being sold. And I think I read an article recently that said that was down to 3% of all sales. So that does make it look like the housing market is getting much more well. Joe, one thing I wanted to ask you about, though, is while the price of homes is going up, the price of gas is going down dramatically. Is there something you can tell us about that? Why is that happening?
Well, the reason gas is going, there's several theories for why. The main thing is it's the OPEC seems to be flooding the market, putting a lot of gasoline out there for people, and that's helping bring the price down. The motivations are murky. Is it because they're trying to punish Russia or Venezuela, or are they just trying to corner the market, or are they trying to make it so that our shale efforts, which are extreme right now, as the price of gas goes down, our efforts to pump more shale oil out of the ground becomes less economically reasonable, you would say. So, but the price of gas being so low right now is actually putting cash in people's pockets.
So it makes houses and everything else more affordable. You wonder, too, though, and Tom's done a lot of stories on this, about sprawl and how agencies like Sandag try to control sprawl and get people in closer, denser housing, et cetera. So housing plays into gas prices, plays into affordability. It gets very complex. And these markets can't turn quickly. I mean, these are aircraft carriers. They're not speedboats. You can't turn on a dime when one goes down and one goes up.
Yeah, as the price of gas comes down, though, of course, people are starting to not care about mileage
right,
as much.
Suddenly your commutes, you're looking to those big commutes again because it's not over $4 a gallon.
Joe, another question I have for you is if you're looking at single-family homes, is San Diego built out? Have we pretty much built all the single-family homes we're going to be able to build?
Well, you can still build more single-family homes, but you're not going to see the large developments like we once did. There is not much land left. It takes forever to get these developments going. So primarily now what we're seeing are infill projects, where there are small single-family homes, and also we're seeing if there is a development, it's going to be maybe 20 or 30 units of houses as opposed to where they were doing multiple stages of 40 units at 40 houses at a time, and they would do like in Otay Mesa and that. So those days are pretty much over.
So density, what we were talking about, tighter, closer in, smaller places, not the big McMansions that we were talking about.
Plays into the Sandag smart growth building around infill.
Right. And you call Uber and you take that to work.
That's right.
What about the rental? We got a few seconds left here. What about the rental market, how excuse me, how has that been affected by this kind of up and down in the residential housing?
Well, right now, rental market is does a 2% vacancy rate, which is quite low, and they say that's because of the healthy economy. People who were pushed back in during the recession are now moving back out, and they're not all buying houses. Of course, they're finding other places to live, so they're moving into apartments or houses, condos, and renting those, and that's really pushing the rental prices up, of course.
Okay, so that market is, pushing it up, and a lot of young people are having a hard time finding apartments.
But they don't have to pay for a car, so that makes it easy.
Close in. What about interest rates? I did mention that the Fed has signaled for the time being, and the stock market, of course, has surged here at the end of the year on the news that the interest rates are going to remain low. At some point, they have to go up, do they not?
The economists are all pointing to late 2015, which would be about this time next year, maybe, that the rates will start going up. It's been forever that they've been at nothing, so pretty soon, so about a year from now they expect them, and that will increase interest rates for homes, but it'll also increase our interest rates on our CDs.
All right, well, we have run out of time. That wraps up our special year-end edition of the Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Lori Hearn of iNewsSource, and our 3 KPBS news editors, Laura Wingard, Joe Guerin, and Tom Fudge. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.